Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another literature review. As you can tell, it's another Stephen King related one. It's of a book that I just finished revisiting a couple days ago. Been meaning to record this since then, but haven't had the time. It, of course, is a novel that Stephen King published in 1992. It is the psychological thriller Dolores Claiborne. Yeah, my book has aged a little bit. It actually all happened during this read through with it. So definitely one within the next couple of read throughs I'm going to have to replace it. Probably get the hardcover off Amazon now. This has served me well though through two reads. I first heard of this story, like a few other Stephen King novels, via the film that I originally watched in cinema as literature, which I will probably revisit it along with Misery in a little bit. Now, when I first read through the book, I knew it was going to be similar, but a little bit different to the movie, as most novel-to-movie adaptations turn out to be. But I was a little surprised the first time, and reading it again, it's like, I'm not as surprised since I've already read it before, but it's like, wow, they really did change certain things, but they kept the core of the story the same in the movie, which I will talk about more when I actually get around to reviewing that film. Now, one thing I will say is that I think that from a writing standpoint, this is one of my favorite King novels, and that is that other than a little bit at the end, like, let me actually bring up the pages. Like, other than these couple pages right here at the end, these 4 pages, this entire novel is written like one long monologue. It's basically if you were to type out one person's part of a conversation that involved like 3 or 4 people, that's the novel. Dolores Claiborne herself giving out one long dissertation in the interrogation room. And the fun thing about that is that with how her reactions to other people in the room are, you can just imagine how they're wording things, but you still get the gist of it. Now, you could have done the movie that way, you know, flashbacks through all the past stuff in an interrogation room, and it would have been just as riveting, but I don't know if it would have been as great a film from certain character interaction levels. I'll probably have an answer for that once I revisit the film, because it's been, I don't know, maybe 7 years since I've seen it, but it would have been an interesting yet different film. And on the whole, the novel, from the perspective it's written at, it tells the story well. Now, it does have one question at the end, which I will mention in a little bit. The whole story is Dolores Claiborne defending herself against an accusation that she killed her employer, Vera, who has died in the last couple days. But she does confess to a crime that the entire island that she lives on, Little Tall Island, which is an island off the coast of Maine. What a surprise, Stephen King's story taking place in Maine. Like one of his influences, Lovecraft, he always set most of his stories in an area he knew. But all the residents of the island knew she committed this crime, they just could never prove it because they never had direct evidence. And that was that she killed her husband, Joe St. George. Now, she tells the story all over the place, which is one thing that's a little weird about it. It's kind of hard to keep track of the story, but it is possible. It's just, as you could expect with how the story is written, she's going all over. I mean, at the beginning, she's telling a little bit about Vera's more recent years, and she skips back and forth in the timeline. But you get the story as a whole. You get why she started to work for Vera, is even back then her marriage was falling apart, and it eventually just became a marriage of convenience, and while the two would say, yeah, I love you, honey. It's one of those things, it's a loveless marriage that everyone's like, yeah, they say it, but yeah, we all know the St. Georges, they don't love each other. They may love their kids, but they don't love each other. They just function. And as time goes on, Dolores gets fed up with Joe beating her, and after one night where she gets hit in the back with wood, she smashes him in the face with a thing of creamer and says, next time you hit me, we're going to get into it. Now, after this, she notices some behavioral changes in her daughter, their oldest child, and as it turns out, it's because Joe is getting at her. That's right, Joe is a pedophile. Well, more accurately, probably more accurate to call him an edophile, if I'm remembering the terminology right, since there is a little terminology difference between someone who goes after prepubescent children and goes after underage teenagers, but whatever terminology you're going to use, the result is still the same. because he's going after an underage girl who is his daughter. And you can just imagine that Dolores is like, oh crap. She knows she has to take care of this, and it eventually leads to her killing her husband, but because of another thing that I'm not going to mention here, but let's just say it involves money. And that's one of the reasons why everyone thinks that Dolores did it. That, and it's just a little odd, the circumstances surrounding Joe's death. I'm not going to spoil it here. If you've seen the movie, you already know, because it's more or less the same thing. It's just a couple parts are abridged to make the narration a little bit smoother for the time. And also, the amount of time she gets away with it is longer. It's about maybe 18 years in the movie, and it's 30 years in the book. Unusual for a Stephen King book, not much supernatural stuff happens, except for one thing that happens twice, where Dolores has a brief psychic connection, or what she's thinking is a hallucination, with a girl. She thinks it might also be an imagination, but as she tells the cops, she knows this girl exists, she doesn't know why. That is because originally, Dolores Claiborne was going to be published together with another Stephen King book under the title of In the Path of the Eclipse. It was going to be combined with this, Gerald's Game, which is getting a film adaptation soon, so this will probably be on the literature review fodder soon. I haven't read it, so it'll be a first-time reading. And if I remember right, I think the main character in Gerald's Game also notices the connection, but I don't know if it's as obvious as Dolores noting it. Now, after what happens with Vera, obviously Dolores decided to go down and confess to all this. And at the end we find out she is cleared of Vera's death. But now the police have a confession on tape of her doing what she did to Joe, which leads into the thing, they don't charge her? Nope, they don't charge her. And I think it's mainly because everyone knew how much of a piece of crap Joe was when he was alive, and what she's telling them, they see, it was justified. It was completely justified. Now, say what you want about murder, but what Joe does throughout the course of the novel, you can understand why Dolores is like, I'm not going to put up with this shit anymore. And Joe does deserve what happens to him. Now, in a more modern setting, someone would probably have actually gone to the police, but there's also the thing of bringing this out into the limelight is going to scar the kid for life, even more than she's already been scarred, and it might just ruin her reputation and ruin everything. So Dolores, being a mother, decided to just burden it all and take out Joe. And there are a couple lines that are said by the character of Vera that really stand out, and they are, sometimes an accident can be an unhappy woman's best friend. And I'm probably going to butcher the second one, but it's something along the lines of, sometimes being a bitch is all a woman has to hold on to. And that sums up Dolores' actions and how she carries herself to a point throughout the rest of her life following it. The bitch one, more so with her interactions with Vera, they're back and forth. But the unhappy woman's best friend, I think you get there. Now, why Vera says that I'm not going to spoil, but if you've seen the movie, you already know. Let's just say that Vera has a lot more character development in the book than she does in the movie. Mainly that her and her husband actually had children, and there's a dark thing involving them, which kind of shows why she's in the condition she was when she passed away, and why she had the stroke she did. That's right, strokes, plural. I'm not going to spoil it for those of you who haven't read the novel. It's a revelation near the end of it, and it's one that's like, wow. Why someone would do that for over 30 years, I don't know, but not having kids and not being a woman, I don't know. Maybe my mindset might be a little different if it was the case, or I might go, I understand, but it's one of those things that's like, why? Perhaps it's just a personality thing. She just didn't want to accept it, or was like Dolores Muse is just trying to make it seem that that didn't happen. Let's just say it's a plot element that you could see why they deleted it from the movie, because it wasn't needed, and mentioning it even in passing might have bogged the plot down a tad. Now, one thing I will say that I know, even without having revisited the film, that is a big change from page to screen, is that Selena is only a minor character in the novel compared to the movie, where she's a secondary protagonist. Here, most of her scenes are in flashback, and all her present stuff is talked about in passing. Now, she still does have a lot of the problems that her movie counterpart does, and since she's older in the novel, they've persisted. And Dolores even mentions that she knows they're there, even if her daughter's trying to hide it from her. Maybe that's why she hasn't come back to the island in years. And she mainly just writes and calls her out of obligation. But the events of what her father did to her messed her up, and you do feel sorry for her, and you're wondering, like, she should come back. She should talk with her mother, because, like the movie, as a child, she suspected what her mother did, but they never talked about it, other than her asking something, but she always suspected. Now, if she only knew the reason why her mother did it, you know, she'd probably forgive her, and it hints near the end that they probably will talk about it, and she probably will forgive her, which, turning that into one of the main central things in the movie, good call if they're going to actually include her as an actual character and not a minor character. That's one thing that's interesting, that you take a character, background character, make her the secondary protagonist. Of course, in doing so, they also delete two other characters, and that is Joe and Dolores' younger children, which I can also understand. I mean, they would have just been background characters during the main action of the flashbacks. They could have been there, but it'd been like, yeah, let's just simplify it by getting rid of them. They don't really do anything other than go out in the background. The younger son is just there, and the only thing they really add to the story is add to Dolores' decision to get rid of Joe. With their middle son, it's because he's getting to the age where he's like, that's bullshit, Dad. Son's always making fun of him because he's a history guy, especially since they have political disagreements, which leads to one other thing, and that is that Joe, this really comes out more in the novel one, but I might notice some things in the movie when I revisit it, and that is, he is a northern good old boy. He's always complaining about commies, like he's equating that term with Democrats, which it's funny that it's something that happens nowadays too, but back in the 60s it's like really equated back in the 60s, but I guess it's a thing that's never going to go away as long as the Democratic Party exists in its current form. And then of course another thing reading it, it's like, wow. But there were people in the 60s that probably did have this viewpoint, being that I didn't live then, and even I'm looking at it in retrospect, I don't get it. It is saying that it's the commies and the N-word lovers who are letting them down south, trying to segregate the schools, and also something about the Jews without having the passage in front of me. I forget the specific wording, but it's about that. Reading it, it's like, wow. And I could see people having this viewpoint, and you could really tell from how they talk about Joe that his ignorance went into other things. Like, it would have been interesting to see Joe try to talk with a person who actually studied political science. In the end, Joe probably would have ended up saying, well, fuck you! Not in that voice, but you get it. Yeah, the only one in the house that seemed to really like him was the youngest son, and that is the other thing, because whereas the oldest son was having disagreements with Joe that might have led to Joe eventually beating the crap out of him, the younger son was basically emulating everything, like calling a fellow classmate a certain S word that is a slur against Jews. Yeah. Kid in elementary school calling that just because he thinks it's cool that his dad says that. Add that to everything else, and you can see why she decided to take him out. So that's really all that them being in the movie would have added, but you didn't really need it. And I'll probably feel that way still when I rewatch it, but you never know. Maybe seeing it, I might notice something that thing could have added to. Now, I've already said from a writing standpoint, at least the prose way, it's definitely one of my favorite Stephen King novels, but plot-wise, I'd also throw it in there too. I mean, like I said, other than that one moment, there's no supernatural element, so it deals more with real-world problems, and has a real-world driven plot, and depending on who's reading the story, you can relate with it. I mean, I can relate to Dolores' dilemma, even though I'm not a woman, and I don't have any children yet, but I can understand why she did what she did, and with how she describes Joe, even though there might be a little bit of bias on her part, even though some of her wording kind of shows that anyone would have thought this about Joe, you can understand why she did what she did. And definitely is one of the novels that comes with my recommendation, and that's a wholehearted recommendation. That's not like, if you like this, if you like that. The only thing is that the wording might take a little bit to get past, and let me read a little bit of it so you can see. I'm going to just read the first opening sentences and you'll see what I mean. What did you ask, Andy Bissett? Do I understand these rights as you've explained them to me? Gory, what makes men so numb? No, you never mind. Steal your John and listen to me for a while. I got an idea you're going to be listening to me most of the night, so you might as well get used to it. Cuss, I understand what you read to me. I don't know why I'm making her sound Irish, but I think it's just some of the accidental English is making that voice come out of me. Do I look like I lost all my brains since I've been down to see you in the market? That was just Monday afternoon, in case you lost track. I told you your wife would give you merry hell about buying that day old bread. Penny wise and pound foolish, the old saying is. And I bet I was right, wasn't I? I understand my rights just fine, Dandy. My mother never raised no fools. I understand my responsibilities too, God help me. That's only a little bit of it, but I think